Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for our next installment of our Red Hen Press reading and conversation series. I'm Toby Harper.
And I'm Monica Fernandez.
And we are so excited to bring you this conversation this evening. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which Monica and I are broadcasting from is the occupied and seized territory of the Gabrielino, Tonga, and Kizh people. To this day, there is still no federal recognition of the present existence of these tribes, despite the fact that in 2013, the groups that have applied for federal recognition from this region had over 3,900 members collectively. There has also not been any federal or state allocation of land for reservations. While we hope these acknowledgements are raising awareness about these tribes, it is clear that there is so much more to be done, and we will continue to share resources to support efforts and raise awareness of these histories and circumstances that have been buried and oppressed for far too long. Tonight's event embraces the writer's work of connection. The work of these three authors centers on finding and celebrating our human connections with each other and with other living beings, like the earth and animals. Monica will be moderating for us today, and it is our pleasure to welcome to the virtual stage Gary Lemons, Kim Stafford, and Judy Grahn.
All right. Thank you so much, Toby. I will see you at the end of the show.
Yeah.
All right. We are going to kick off this event with a few brief readings from these amazing writers. Gary, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me on here, and it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you and anyone who's watching as well. I'll start with a poem from my first book with Red Hen called Bristol Bay and Other Poems, and this poem is called Voodoo Economics. And it has something to do with the idea that as people get more wealthy, those with less benefit from that. Voodoo Economics. Walking the back country one day, I came upon a bear cub surrounded by wolves. The cub was making slow circles as the wolves snapped its thick pelt from behind. They were playing with it before the kill. The small bear cried as instinct raised its claws. I'm no hero. I know this about myself, but some things are worth dying for. I ran at the nearest wolf and fell on its back. My weight drove it snarling to the ground. I stood with its neck in my hands, broke it, threw the body at the others. They did not remember the bear. It was me and the pack and the occasional cloud. They charged. I bit and stomped. They bit and tore. I gouged and swore. They howled and struck. When it was over, when I was inside of the wolves, we went back for the cub, and it was delicious. And this poem is from The Weight of Light. The desert is prepared for anything except rain. Oh, I'm sorry, this is called Painted Ponies. The desert is prepared for anything except rain and the inevitable consequences of an extravagant gift. One old guy claims he drove cattle on the Goodnight Loving Trail, but it turns out he only remembers the journey from the perspective of a cow. Past lives are a bitch, and then you die. And one last poem. Concerto for Horn and Guitar. It was a lovely but insufficient commitment to suck the stranger's toes in her mouth, then wet them with the gravity of her disregard. He wanted more. He wanted to be like cornbread, dredged through every drop of her. But this is literature, and something must be saved for the last page. Something that allows room in the marginal truth for the tra-la-la-la coming from the alert and freshly watered violets on the sill. That's when she noticed the hooks on the ceiling above the bed, hung with tiny throats that all at once delivered a sermon on restraint and what it means to escape higher up a tree with bitten feet and the strength in tired arms. She's alone now, brushing her long hair into a bucket of milk as hereditary baldness and change of life collide with every stroke. Once the bucket is filled with what falls out, she will offer the content to the narrator watching inside the mirror, watching the physical brushing to make sure there's an authentic commitment to the story and not the common falsehoods or easy images stroked from the preordained. If anyone reads this, please don't think there's an ulterior reason for speaking of the boudoir as a place where zookeepers might apply. Be aware, love was hurried into extinction by those who covet its wrist bones to decorate the necks of doctors, debating the perfect mixture of chemicals to stop the prisoner's heart. And who isn't a doctor? And who isn't a prisoner? Who isn't about to be executed? Who hasn't once been loved? Let's be clear. This is winter. This is the cold sky shouting curses down the megaphone of the stem at the orphans huddled underground. This is the mistaken familiarity of fruit going bad. This is the lullaby sung to the creature with horns in a frozen trough where moonlight is insufficient to melt the ice that holds it. This is the autobiography of purple martin wings, amplified all evening into an audible requiem for the beautiful instruments dangling from the gallows of right now.
Thank you so much, Gary. That was really great. It's always so great to hear you read. Kim, how about we hear from you next?
Yeah, well, I too am very grateful to be with all of you on screen and somewhere far away. And I'm going to start with a poem of gratitude called All My Relations. I want to thank all my relations for this chance to be on earth in her time of flourishing, to thank the first people of this place, the Multnomah people, the Clackamas, Malala, Kalapuya, Tualatin, and Chinook, to honor their sovereignty in long and continuing relation, still teaching us how we might be here together. I want to thank my mother and father, moon and sun, for setting me forth before their own passing on. To thank my grandmother who listened to me so eloquently. I learned to listen to my own heart and mind, to find stories and songs there. I want to thank my family and friends and all citizens and travelers who study and work for deeper kinship in this place with one another and with all creatures, one earth, visible, palpable, fragile, intricate, resonant, in need of our better stories. I want to thank you who have gathered here to receive what I have carried in hope that something I have may meet something you need, so all our relations may be strengthened for the life we live together. Amen. So here's one from early in the weeks of the pandemic, about a year ago, when my habit was to read terrible things in the news and be troubled, but it was spring. And this is called Oregon Dawn, in spite of the news. Before I can get to today's statistics, so many stricken, so many dead, I'm summoned by the birds raising a ruckus outside, crows and jays in festive outrage, chirr and aria from the little brown birds, the mournful dove, the querulous towhee, rusty starlings in their seesaw mutter, and a woodpecker flicker hammering the gutter staccato. On the porch, I'm assaulted by the merciless scent of trees opening their million flowers as I inhale the deep elixir of hazel, hawthorn, maple, and oh, those shameless cherry trees. And just when I've almost recovered my serious moment, I gasp, helpless to see the full queen moon sidling down through a haze of blossoms. So you wake up feeling bad, but you look around and do a little writing and you feel better. Okay, one more little poem called Advice from a Raindrop. You think you're too small to make a difference? Tell me about it. You think you're helpless at the mercy of forces beyond your control? Been there. Think you're doomed to disappear, just one small voice among millions? That's no weakness, trust me. That's your wild card, your trick, your implement. They won't see you coming till you're there, in their faces, shining, festival, expendable, eternal. Sure, you're small, just one small part of a storm that changes everything. That's how you win, my friend. Again and again and again.
That was so great, Kim. Thank you. I love that poem. It's so inspiring. I feel much better about kind of my existence now. Judy, how about you close up this section of readings?
Okay. I want to start by acknowledging that I am sitting here in Palo Alto, California on Ohlone land, which was unceded. It's the San Francisco Peninsula. And there are 425 shell mounds here and 4 surviving groups. And this particular part of the land is unceded, belonging to the Ramaytush people. I'm reading from Queen of Wands, a collection of short poems. Love belongs to those who do the feeling. On the other hand, a spider lives in the topmost branches of a pine, her house a god's eye gleaming among the needles. On hot days, she pays out her line and twirls on down to the surface of the lake or pond to get a little drink of water or to wash her face. She's such an ordinary person. The trees line the earth, great and small, dogwood, plane, maple, rubber, the elegant palm, the scrubby oak, the elm. We're ordinary persons too. We have our longtime friends across the distances, our urgent messages and our differences, and we have our parties. We sugar up our petals just to get the probes of bees in us. Most green ladies love everything the whipping wind can give them. The avocado tree hung with her long green breasts, she aches for fingers pulling at her. The cherry, peach, and nut trees bent with swollen balls, long for hands and mouths and claws. The fig tree, with her black jewels tucked between her hand-shaped emerald leaves, is happily fondled by the dancing birds, wild and raucous and drunk on natural fig wine. Almost any summer morning, sunbeams fall into my arms like lovers, giving me everything they've got. And they're so hot. Oh, honey, I take it all. Give it to me, baby, is my song. My second poem is also from a Red Hen collection of my work, my 9-part poems. And this is in the voice of Mom. Black ocean, night sky, a garment of flowers, performing their dances in axial turns. On Earth, mass migration is the new normal, rippling the robe of life, everyone on the run, running, twisting from the great devourer, leaving tent cities, boats capsize, animal eyes of wonder at increase of trauma, not knowing exactly how now to be wise. On Earth, elite humans hide in their towers. Ordinary folks take a strange faith in guns as chemicals, petroleum, metal fuel turmoil. Smaller-eyed beings fall silent of tongue. Me, I am Ma. Their eons my hours. Scope of my life full of minor terms. I prevent suffering by making things formal, more or less steady, more or less fun. I prevent suffering by balancing showers with sunlight, laws of my nature to shelter the land. Take only as much as you need. Think of hours and give back whenever you can. Once in a while, a disruption of powers, usually collision of meteor runs. This time, and to their own conscious horror, this time, the grandiose, near tiniest of ones. Speed it up, unwrapped my robe of all flowers, shut down their precious connections to being, with inflated sense of importance and power. They, who are tinier to me than microbes to them. For 3 of my days, they've been planters and flowers, given the bounty to burst at their seams. I wish them a solace in midst of their sorrow, connections to wholeness, the hearts of all beings. No one is ever that far from my power, even if all I can give them is calm, a bit of compassion, this current crossover. No one is ever that far from my arms. Me, Ayama, the cup and the ladle, fruits of all looms and turns of the sun. Me, Ayama, both stitcher and cradle. My robe is eternal, never will be done. How to approach me? First thing, humility. Secondly, service to whatever is alive. Unconditional love requires permeability. Surrender the ego. Have faith. I'll arrive.
That was so wonderful, Judy. Thank you. And we're going to have a couple more readings from these amazing authors at the end of the program. But we are going to transition to a bit of a conversation now. And actually, I'm going to go, I apologize to the authors. I'm going to go a little out of order because Judy's poem just made me really think about form. And I heard those rhymes. And so I kind of would like to start off with our little conversation about form. We'd spoken a little bit in a pre-conversation a couple of days ago about how form kind of lives and resides in your work, but all of you tend to kind of do something with it. Judy, you'd mentioned that you love to deconstruct form. So I am so curious, and this is something that I want to ask all poets all the time. How do you decide what a poem will look like? What choices you make with your punctuation or your stanzas or your line breaks? How do you kind of feel that out? How about we start with you, Judy, since your rhymes were so prevalent in that poem you just read?
Okay. And I chose it for the fact that it is end rhyme forms, that it seems to me a very formal poem, and it's trying to talk about a formality of nature that goes beyond us and holds us. And for me, the poem decides the form. Sometimes what occurs to me first is the rhythm before the content. And other times the content comes in, but it comes in just as prose. So I write the prose down and then I try to apply some poetic to it. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Other times an entire poem falls out of the sky onto me or overnight and I wake up with it. However many stanzas, the whole thing is there. And so I think of myself in forms as just taking the license to use any and all of them that I can possibly absorb, to have some kind of vocabulary of them. And I think I developed that vocabulary when I was a kid and then into my 20s as well, to be like a musician and have practiced before I go to become a part of the jazz quartet or whatever, to have practiced everything and then whatever it needs, it being the poem, it can pick out of my basket.
Amazing. Kim, how about you? I noticed in your last poem about the raindrop, it was pretty conversational.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you kind of use that kind of form a lot, or do you like to use kind of like the formal structure like Judy? What's your take?
I would love to have a poem that sounds conversational, but upon examination would be formal. I was so struck in Judy's poem by the patterns in the natural world that seem to be schooling the poem. The spider going down and the eye looking up at the sun. We're taught form by the rhythm of day and night, the seasons, the cycles of the moon. We're bilaterally symmetrical. We're surrounded by form. So in a way, it would be surprising. It would be a stretch to create a poem that was formless. It's hard for me to imagine. I think I'm with Judy too, in that the poem starts to come, and it may be prosaic, it may be informal, but it wants to. I get the feeling it wants to be more settled somehow, and it really instructs me. Here's an episode. Oh, here's an episode. What if those two episodes were the same number of lines? What if they each ended with a shorter line? There's that sort of playful, childish delight for me in just nudging things around, and then they start to sing, and then you're getting somewhere.
That's so great. Gary, how about you? I know that your poems in your snake quartet, they, for lack of a better word, they slither. I noticed that they kind of like do that with the form, and I wonder if you did that on purpose, and how you felt kind of like forming all of those amazing poems.
Yeah, I agree with both Judy and Kim in terms of taking my cues from the natural world. Also, I spent a lot of my later teens into my mid-20s academically learning specific forms and, continually writing them over and over until I had some sort of craft relationship with them. And then as I grew older and drifted away from that and began to live in the real world and not so much in academia anymore, I noticed that there was an organic form already around me. The wind has a certain relationship with the trees. And if you watch the way the leaves move after a while, you see symmetry. And the same with the way birds flock. And all of a sudden I realized that this is where I want to take the forms that I'm going to put into my work. And so especially the wind has a lot to do with the way I now look for the music underlying the language in my poems. The beauty of being a poet, I think, is that it continually makes you pay attention to the world around you and gather from that the material, as opposed to the headlines or something of that sort. Although, of course, these days that's hard to ignore.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah.
That's so insightful. Thank you. I know that the three of you had like a pre-conversation before this wonderful event. I wondered if you had any questions for each other, or if any topics that you discussed then you kind of wanted to bring back up now.
Well, I have a thought, that I think I heard in both your poems, Judy and Gary, the supposed boundaries between the human and the the creature consciousness seems to be very permeable for both of you. Gary, in your poem, when first you're the attacker, and then you're the attacked, and then you're inside the wolf, and the cub is delicious. I thought a kind of a frivolous disregard for the supposed parameters of being. And Judy, too, you're just entering into this whole wild system I think because we started with a land acknowledgement, both of you, do you think we're becoming indigenous, or at least we're trying to become honorable citizens of the natural world?
Well, we're creeping a tiny bit closer to undoing this hideous mechanistic philosophy that has just about wrecked our culture's claim to any connection to nature. And I think it's really up to poets to try to bridge and try to change how our readers and how their families and everybody deals with and thinks about every living creature as being a person, as being valuable, as reincarnating, maybe as Gary is suggesting.
Yeah,
that's our chore, and it's huge. And let's keep going as hard as possible.
Yeah, for me, that's all exactly right. And I have a 40, 50-year yoga practice. And part of yoga, the word means oneness, essentially. And that ongoing practice of establishing or becoming conscious of a pre-existing relationship to the all, to everything, is very much important to my poetry, as well as the way I leave my footprints, on the world or in the world. So yeah, whatever boundaries there are between our individual consciousnesses and I'm attempting to dissolve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm hearing that poetry is like a porthole looking out into, from the human world into something much bigger, much older, much wiser. And Gary, I'm thinking of from a previous conversation, you're someone who's planted 500,000 trees.
Yeah.
That kind of restorative impulse, I think we practice in poetry too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gary, can you tell us a little bit more about that project of planting 500,000 trees?
Well, I worked with a tree planting co-op, and 500,000 trees was toward the small side. Many of the men and women I planted with planted more than millions, because you're planting 1,000 a day, and mostly in clear cuts, and you're working 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week for 6 or 7 months, and it just mounts up. And then you go back years later and there's a forest where there was clear-cut ground. It's an extraordinary thing. And in my entire life, it's a thing I feel blessed to have done. Not just the putting the trees back, but also the relationship with the people that I worked with. We had a crew of crazed artists across all genres, guitar players, dancers, poets, novelists, and it was just remarkable to be young and doing that kind of work, and how it fed back into the writing.
Yeah, that's great. Gary, you have this wonderful thing that you do in your work where you suddenly change point of view, or you suddenly surprise us with an entirely different thought from somewhere else. And it makes me think about the whole subject of voice. And I was told as a young poet that what I needed was to find a voice, and that until I could find a voice, I wouldn't really be a poet. And I have never found such a voice. So I call myself polyvocal because I shift around, and because there are multiple voices inside of some of my poems. Yeah. In fact, even this one that I didn't even think was polyvocal really is. That first one I read suddenly changes from an I voice outside the trees to the trees talking. And that's, that's poetic license for me to do that. But I think I see that in your work a lot, a lot of what you're doing, of a sudden shift from a totally different point of view that's shocking and marvelous. And exactly right, it seems.
Yeah.
For what we all need to be learning, to see what I'm saying, to be able to get out of ourselves and into imagining, at least, being something or someone else, and what that life could be like, what that loving heart might consist of inside of a spider.
Wow, beautiful. Very beautifully said.
Yeah.
So great. Did you guys have anything? I didn't want to interrupt your really great free-flowing conversation.
Well, I have a question for Kim. Actually, I have a question for Judy too, but I'll start with Kim. When we talked earlier, prior to this moment, you had said something to me that really resonated, and I had never put it into that. I had never conceptualized it that way. And that you were talking about, I think, editing, and you said cut back to the green in relationship to gardening, and that just really, I went, wow, that's. Because editing is a huge part of what I consider the art or craft of writing. The fun part is getting it all out and then sort of making something sensible.
Yeah, well, the story behind that, as I had told Gary, was I was trying to get advice. I was helping out clean up a writer's retreat, and there was a grapevine, and I asked for help. And, how do I prune this grapevine? Someone said, cut back to green. And I thought, well, that is what you do when you revise. Here's this sort of rampant growth of all kinds of things, some of it dead, useless in the way. And to cut back to the wild, native, feral part of what you're writing. I learned a word, reversion, as opposed to revision. Reversion is to return to the ancestral type. And I think that's a very exciting part of revising a poem for me. What is the original, primitive, wild thing that I might cover up with too much thinking? But maybe I can, get it dancing, get it speaking in its native voice.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. I love that. And I'm also a writer. I write mostly prose, but I remember from a previous conversation, I'm not sure who was in it, but there was talk about how a poem has to kind of convey a message in its immediacy, essentially. It has to kind of, it has that challenge that you're trying to put forth this idea in a relatively short form. Whereas with prose, you kind of you can go wherever. But I love that concept of cutting it to the green, because even in prose, that works, that is necessary. So I love that. I'm going to use that from now on, for sure.
So, Monica, I have a question for you. I've always thought that some of the coolest poems are intense passages embedded in prose. Where you really, a character speaks the deep truth, or, there's a descriptive thing that gets cinematographic. Do you find that in your writing, that sometimes you just hit a sweet spot and it starts to sing?
I would say so. It's been a while since I've written anything that I'm happy with. But when I was doing that more consistently, I loved that magic with, like I would be writing something and then all of a sudden, like an hour has gone by and I didn't even notice. And then like I usually did most of my writing at night. So it would be like 11:30 and I would have work in the morning and I'd be like, oh no, but I was so caught up in it. So yeah, there's definitely that magic that happens when you're kind of writing, and you're writing, whether it be some kind of dialogue exposition, kind of like kind of passage, or just like the description of like someone falling in love or someone grieving or something like that. Those passages are always so much fun to write. And now I really want to write one. So
good. All right.
So thank you for that, Kim. That was great.
Well, my dad used to say we'd be chatting at the dinner table, and he'd say, "Let's talk recklessly." And I think a writer is someone who just does that on a regular basis, to talk recklessly and see what's alive.
That's so great. Gary, you said you had a question for Judy.
Yeah, I'm curious, Judy. You've been writing longer than I have, which is amazing considering. And I'm wondering, having known about you for some time, how you have managed to live in an ongoing difficult political world and draw your material from that and build on it book to book. I mean, the whole Snake Quartet is to some degree driven by politics. And it makes me wonder what your evolution has been through the political landscape to get to this touching creatures, touching spirit, which seems to be an unexpected, for me at least, opening.
I think my life, I'm starting to see it as an uncoiling, something that was very tightly coiled because so many things happened to me in my family, and so many things were challenging for me when I came of age. And yet poetry was saying, you're mine and you're going to do what I want. And I had to go through all manner of illness and recovery to really be set in my path. And then it's been a matter of uncoiling. So I can't believe in my 20s, I had no idea what I was going to write. Now I'm like, can I just live and be sane 10 more years so I can finish some things up? Because they just keep falling out and they keep being fascinating, and I keep just following them, and they accumulate. I'm sure that you all know that things accumulate. So one decade isn't finished. It lays the groundwork for what's next.
Yeah.
That's so wonderful. We have time for maybe one or two quick questions. I do invite anybody who's watching, if you want to send us any questions in the comments, I'd be happy to read them out loud for you guys. But did any of you have any other points that you wanted to ask each other before I dipped back into my list of questions that I sent you?
Well, one thing I explore in this book, Singer Come From Afar, is the idea of a poem written for someone or for a place or for a cause. And I feel like that is sort of coiling, Judy, around in everything we're saying, to write for the spider, for the wolf, for the cub. Is that something you're aware of when you're, am I writing for myself, or is there a kind of a directional sense of mission or reach when you're writing?
For me, there's always been this directional and this sense of mission. I just have always felt, I don't know what this comes from really, but I have always felt that I'm on some kind of mission, and it slowly reveals itself. Yeah. To me, I learn from my poems rather than that. So I'm sure I write them as a part of my own schooling.
Yeah.
But that's not what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about how the subject needs to be articulated and who is going to possibly be reading it or using it. And then I'm also aware that's not even any of my business. Yeah. Once it's done, it's out in the air. And you don't know who is going to run with it, which direction.
Yeah.
Gary, do you have a sense of mission or?
Mostly where I've gotten over the years is it's sort of a deconstruction of my personal listening to what is being said by the more and more subtle voices that are obscured by present events and often extinguished by them. And yet they're no longer audible to the ears, but they're audible to the spirit. Yeah. And so, I'm trying to feel my way into the new work I never sat down to write a specific poem. I sit down to the empty page and wait. And that's why editing is so onerous almost, because I have no idea what I'm going to end up with through listening.
I love that. And Kim, that was one of my questions. So I'm so glad that you asked that, because I did want to make sure that we got to that. How about you? I mean, you directed the question to Judy and Gary, but I'd love for you to answer. And then we have one question from the audience.
Well, I want to save the earth. I want to make peace on earth. I want us all to be kin. This is a big project. I call it the human project. And it goes across boundaries. It ignores nationalities. I have a friend in Iran who says a poem should not satisfy your thirst. It should make you thirstier. And I think my direction is to write things that just make people hungry for connection.
I love that. Yeah. That is so wonderful.
I want to say there's something I want. Gary, I want someone in your Hodad group to make a film. Wouldn't that be a great movie of life in the clear cut?
Yeah.
And Judy, that second poem you read, there's an incantatory kind of chanting quality to it. I want it to be a dance. I want it to be chanted while people are dancing like birds.
Yeah.
I just started having these visions.
Yeah. There's been a couple dances done to some of my work. Yeah. Surprising. It's surprising. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Monica, next time Red Hen will have the performance.
Yeah, I would love that. That would be so great.
We can do it right now.
All right, we have time for one question from the audience. This is from Michael on Facebook. He asks, in this era of urgency and unrest, how do you feel your poetry can shape the future for the better? I mean, let's go to Judy first, because I know that Judy, your poetry has already made a difference in history. So how are you maintaining that for the future?
Right. That's always the question. And currently what I'm doing, thanks to the generosity of Red Hen Press, in giving permission to Commonality Institute and Gregory Gages to publish one of my anti-racist 9-part poems with backstory and notes about the mythology underlying it, and my insights and so on, in something that is now published called Descent to the Roses of a Family, a poet's journey into anti-racism and personal and social healing. And we're starting to teach that. It's a new approach to anti-racism, and it's very promising right now. So I'm tenuous about it, because does it really work? And we're checking it out, and it looks that way. So I'm hopeful. I was holding my breath. It was, going to be of use, which is a kind of thermometer I use.
Kim, how about you? I know that you wrote a lot of pandemic poems over the pandemic.
Yeah, I made a vow a little over a year ago. Every day I'll write a poem and post it on Instagram, send these poems out there looking for readers, listeners. And I feel I want to be like a mountain spring, just pouring forth, in hopes that, as I said in my opening poem, something I have may meet something you need, so that we can be blessed together. That's my hope.
Thank you so much. Gary, final thoughts. How can you feel your poetry can shape the future for the better?
Well, the entire Snake Quartet is unfortunately driven by the foreseeable difficulties in our future, which I'm very concerned about, not just for myself, but for our children and their children, and what remains for them. And so the poems are more of a kind of a witnessing. I'm not actually trying to come up with solutions, because I tried that for a while and I realized I can't. If I could do that, I'd be, like world famous. I don't know how to solve this. all I can do is frame it. And maybe if enough people frame it in a similar manner, a solution will arise communally. That's my hope.
Amazing. Yeah, I loved how, I think it was in your afterword, Gary, that you mentioned that you were really hoping to kind of shine a mirror essentially on the world, on the state of the world. And I think that is one of the most effective ways to kind of to inspire change, is to show people how bad things have gotten. So I adore all three of you. Thank you so much for this really great conversation. We are going to close up with some final readings from all three. So we'll start off with Judy.
Okay, and I am reading from my new publication from Red Hen, which is it's prose. It's called Touching Creatures, Touching Spirit, and it's anecdotes, essays, comments, stories about our connection with creatures. So I'm reading from a story called Only Strawberries Don't Have Fathers. To repay this ultra spectacular kindness in giving me a place to live, I became their gardener that very moment. Told Dr. Darby I could raise all the vegetables and fruits she and her wife Sarah could eat. They went inside their house to talk this over, which I could hear through the open window, and while they did, I changed my name to Clovis. My dad would never find me with a name like that. Sarah said I could stay for a trial period if I would take a shower, comb my hair, and allow them to buy me some new clothes. Oh, I wasn't ready for all that, but I said I would do some of it. So more confab inside the house while I counted the different food garden spaces they were wasting with landscape plants and decided where the compost pile should go. I had a prescription and a bottle of meds from my last stay in the hospital, but after a few weeks, I just had a problem with those meds. Here's what I love to do. Get to know creatures and plants, get the dirt wet with buckets of water and put my hands in it to stir it up, come upon a little tangle of earthworms down underneath and look at their dark and bright red stripes like Scandinavian t-shirts. Then listen to the wind talking to me, especially at night. With these meds, no matter how small I cut the pill, I felt dull. You can't feel dull in a garden. It begins to dislike you. You have to dance with the plants. And the wind lately wasn't saying anything interesting as I kept forgetting to ask the questions. Lonely times like these, I stop taking anything, don't even eat, and it works out better until my dad comes after me and I need to hide. It was during one of these times that Dr. Darby came back to the cottage yard to find me. By now I was sometimes calling her Dr. D to myself. She peered at me under the house where I was curled into the crabgrass. Had been there for a couple of days. She stretched out on the ground so we were on the same level. What's up? She picked a blade of flat onion top and sucked on it. My dad again, I said. He came by on the street in his black pickup truck earlier. I know he's looking for me. He goes round and round the block until... She moved the grass to the other side of her mouth. I don't think your dad could drive all the way from Kentucky to this exact street and find you, she said. Oh, yes, I saw him. I've seen him lots of times. Well, we won't. Sarah and I would never let him take you. I hope you know that. And I will be on the watch for him. Now, come on out. I rolled out. Crabgrass, I had noticed, was crawling up through the floorboards on its way into my kitchen. Dismantling a house from the floor upwards. How creative. What's that blood on your arms and face, Dr. D asked. Did you cut yourself? I licked my arms. Strawberry, I said. I had rolled right through my own carefully planted strawberry bed, and some were already fruited out. When I first planted the bed, Dr. Darby had come out and read the plant's life story to me from the Good Neighbors Gardening newsletter, delivered free twice a month. Strawberries don't have fathers. The strawberry plant clumped with integrity into a short cylindrical body, seated on roots and enfolded by small, neatly defined deep green leaves, is a matriarchy. Strawberries don't have fathers, but cats definitely do. Cats are matriarchal too, as far as I can tell. And the way my cat Morgan and her daughter incorporated fathers into their family is what I want to tell you about. Making a comparison of Dr. Darby's lesbian family with Morgan's cat family makes sense, given that in both cases the question is, what is the experience of two mothers raising a baby who wish to turn its care at least partially over to a male of their choice? Because it turned out by the time I moved in, Dr. D was pregnant.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Judy. Gary, how about you read next?
Okay, I'll read something from the Snake Quartet, just a section out of the longer poem called the Hunger Sutras. And speaking of which, it's a 30-page poem written in iambic pentameter, bizarrely enough. I didn't intend to do that. In summary, everything is just born this instant. Reading glasses. In summary, everything is just born this instant. Even the one-armed burglar playing taps above an upturned cradle. The zookeeper, so to speak, never sleeps. Because of this, no one is permitted out of their cage unless accompanied by a muscular angel who patrols the darkness wearing nothing but a thong. When the eyes open to the first moment of the returning, there will be visions. Something like mastodon or redwood or wolverine or field of bluebells, ladled out of tears, then distributed between molecules like a liquid arch, joining mountains to the color of dawn. We flash like fire in a drop of dew. We feel the architecture collapsing, leaving the roof of the flower standing, beneath which, while the shovel sleeps, a wax and hooded figure in a flaming cage rise to the applause of its enemy. Or perhaps a sudden flare in the mine to chase flies from the carcass of the truth. And then, lastly, gardener. I never tried to be brave. Let that be for others, or come spontaneously. I become emboldened when ice forms in late autumn on the dead vines whose fruit I ate all summer. I am brother among trees pierced by the beaks of birds or the metal fingers of saws. Their sweet blood drips slowly from my frozen wounds. When everything is prepared, I run to the winter garden, enter through the stiff gate, begin to dance among the remains of plenty. Dance, yes, little steps in sparkling dirt, while angels, torn from paintings, flap above the frozen rows like birds afraid to land because the scarecrows might be real. And I'm telling you, we are.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gary. All right, Kim, you are closing this out.
Okay, just two poems. I woke up one morning just with the phrase white flag patriots. And I puzzled over, who would be the white flag patriot? So I wrote this to figure it out. The children went first because they had the most to lose. No color, no emblem on their flags, no shouting, surrendering instead as they shuffled toward the White House. Some crying, some stern, a few humming lullabies their mothers had taught them. In the rose garden where men babbled into microphones, the children lay down in the grass to watch clouds drift west until speeches trailed off and only the wind was heard. Then white flags flashed in the wind as the children rose and sang together, "You have overcome. but we are not afraid.
Mm.
And then this last one, a couple summers ago, I was just so troubled by the world. All I could do was go pick blueberries. I went out to a farm and got my basket and went out in the rows, and I noticed that, I'm getting older. I didn't bend down to the ground. I sort of did the easy picking up at the top. And so this phrase, easy pickings, came. And again, I started the poem the next morning with that phrase, easy pickings. It's easy to hide. It's easy to laugh in the blueberry field. Staccato plink and plunk as berries plummet into the pail. And you hear children banter in a dozen languages among the green rows. It's easy to forgive there, too, viewing old betrayals sweetly diminished by the honeyed crush of berries on your tongue. It's even possible to imagine peace between people who hated each other before their children met between these rows and asked one another, "Shall we pick together? Come, pick with me, my enemy, my angry self. Come, split couple bickering over money. Come to the blueberry field, Palestine and Israel. Come bow and squint under the sun-splashed leaves. Come, peer into these dark shadows for blue."
Wow.
Thank you so much, all three of you. You were amazing. This conversation was so great. I was really nervous about it at first because I wasn't sure if I would be able to keep up with you guys. But I'm so glad that I was at least witness to your incredible conversation.
You're a master, Monica. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes,
I just wanted to remind the viewers, all three of these books are available for purchase or pre-order. All three authors actually have also published multiple collections with Red Hen. So Kim's Singer Come From Afar just came out this April. And he's also had Wild Honey, Tough Salt, which was last year?
2019.
2019. Judy's Touching Creatures, Touching Spirit comes out next week, right?
Right.
So next week. And then there's also two more incredible poetry collections that she's published with us. Gary is the author of Snake 4, Original Grace, which is the final installment in the incredible Snake Quartet. So that's been a long time coming. So if you're going to pick up Snake 4, make sure that you pick up the other three also. I'll bring Toby back up on screen to say our goodbyes.
Go see you all.
Thank you. Thank you
all so much for joining us tonight for this incredible reading and conversation. Monica, fantastic moderating.
Thank you.
As she said, don't forget you can pick up the new collections and their older collections from these authors at the link just dropped in the chat. You can get 30% off with the promo code Hen House at home. Stay tuned next week for our next National Endowment for the Humanities poetry reading and lecture event featuring Jason Schneiderman and Ellen Bass with Douglas Manuel moderating. And tomorrow, we are honored to present a reading and conversation with former U.S. Poets Laureate Rita Dove and Tracy K. Smith in partnership with the Broad Stage. Tickets start at $10 and can be found at the link that will be dropped in the chat shortly. Thank you again for joining us tonight, and we'll see you very soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.